In order to use the Property Manager API, also known as PAPI, there are a few concepts that you need to familiarize yourself with. And these concepts are described in the PAPI documentation, but it's easier to learn how they work and learn about these concepts by starting with the Property Manager UI in the Akamai portal. So we're going to log in here as a user. Get the right password. And the first concept we're going to look at is what we call groups. This is best understood as a directory structure. And within each account, there's a sort of a top-level group, which is also known as the contract. And underneath that top-level group, you can have one or more subgroups, and each of these subgroups can have subgroups underneath them as well. And these are basically directories where property manager configurations and other artifacts live. So we're going to look at one group here called PAPI Lab. And we see here, once I click on that, we see over here on the right, we see there's a bunch of properties. These are property manager configurations that are used to serve the traffic through the Akamai platform for your website. So let's look at one of these property manager configurations, papitest.akamlab.com. When we click on that, we get a little bit of description about and information about this property. The key thing here is that each property has one or more versions, and these versions are active either on the Akamai staging or production network, or neither, like in this case. So if I click on this version here, which is version 1, I will see the actual configuration that's being used to serve the traffic. And each property version has a list of host names. These are the end user facing host names that are for your website that's now on Akamai. And the way you direct the traffic to Akamai is by CNaming this host name, the property host name, to an edge host name. And the edge host name is also managed via the Property Manager API or PAPI. Another artifact that's used for that's required for all properties is an edge. It's a CP code or a content provider code, and this artifact, the CP code, is also managed via PAPI. So what we're looking at here is the Property Manager configuration version 1, and it has it consists of a set of rules. And there's a default rule, and then a bunch of sub-rules that can have their own sub-rules. And so it's a nested structure. Each rule has a set of criteria or if statements, and one or more of these if statements, and then a list of behaviors or actions to take if those criteria are true. And what this ends up translating to when you're working with PAPI is a JSON object that looks something like this. And so when you're managing the Akamai configuration settings via PAPI, you'll be working with this structure here. So you see here, for instance, an origin setting, an origin behavior, and this looks like this in the Property Manager UI. So you have an origin behavior here, and then the different settings for the origin behavior. Okay, so to summarize, we have to work with PAPI, you need to understand what a group is, and that's basically a directory structure where your properties, which are the property manager configurations where they're located under your account. And each property has a number of versions. These versions can be activated on Akamai staging or production networks, and they contain a rule tree, a list of conditions and behaviors to execute if those conditions are true or not. And then in order to serve the traffic on Akamai, you need a host name associated with these property versions, and an edge host name to CNAME over the traffic to Akamai. And finally, you need a CP code in order to serve the traffic as well. And all of this is managed via PAPI. And finally, before you can start using PAPI, there are two things you should do to get started. So the first thing is to install what we call the Edge Grid client for your programming environment. In the case of Python, there's an Edge Grid client for Python, which you can find on the github.com/Akamai repository. And there's also Edge Grid clients for other programming languages as well. But in this example, we're going to look at the Edge Grid client for Python. And it has an installation instructions here. Once you have that installed, you need to go into the Akamai portal and create what we call credentials or open credentials. And these are the authorization tokens that you'll be using with PAPI to access your property manager configurations using PAPI. So the way you do that is you click over here on if you're in Property Manager already, then you can just click on the breadcrumbs here to go into the group you're currently in. And then you can click on the Organize Groups and Users button, or you can go to the Configure Manage Users and Groups application from the mega menu. This particular account has a lot of users, so it takes a minute before it comes up. And then you would click on the New API Client for Me button. And for PAPI, it's important that you choose the top level group, also known as the contract, to grant the access for your client here in the top level group. So set that to admin or whatever your permission is. You could be editor, admin, or any number of other roles. And then give it a name. My name, and this is the name of the client, and then you will assign it to an API, at least one API. In this case, we're going to use the Property Manager API, so you can start typing in that here. And you set the access level to be read-write. Read only if you're only doing read operations, but for now we'll go with read-write here. And then you click Submit. And then finally, have to create, click on the New Credential button, which will give you a list of tokens that you can place in copy, and then you can go into your local machine, and if you've installed the EdgeGrid client, you should have a file called .edgerc, and if you edit that, you'll see a bunch of these. Well, if you have already existing clients, EdgeGrid clients, you can you'll see them here, and you can add your new client in here. Call it, in this case, I'll call it my name. For PAPI, it's important that you add this max body setting to so that PAPI will work with larger payloads. And that's it. Now you can, in your Python code, you can now refer to this section here and this credential.